Warning. Society has deemed a number of conversation topics as rude to discuss in polite company. Luckily, those rules don't apply here. Welcome to Impolite Company. The host of Impolite Company, Chris Sear.
I meant to have this episode up a little bit earlier, but it was a rough weekend last week. We had to take our cat to the vet and put her to sleep, and that sucked. Like, one of my oldest jokes is a joke I wrote after my dog died. It's one of these things where people always compare having pets and having kids, right? As if they're the same thing, and they're not, and the joke acknowledges that. But I go down the route where kids are way easier emotionally than pets. And it's true. Like, don't get me wrong. I get it. I can put my pet in a crate and walk away for a weekend and it'll still be alive and I won't go to jail. But there are definitely a lot of ways that being a parent is just easier than being a pet owner, right? Because for one, barring like a massacre or a horrible event or some medical tragedy, your child's going to live longer than you. Unless something goes terribly wrong, and that's always sad. I'm not saying it's not, but your child is going to outlive you. However, unless you're elderly, you're going to outlive this pet that you purchase or adopt or bring into your home or get stuck with because an ex moves out on you after she cheats on you, or, I don't know, just magically appears one day because you read the wrong scroll in the wrong temple. And now you've got this black cat with green eyes that speaks Latin to you. Get rid of that pet right now. Go do it. I'll wait. But like barring, unless you're elderly, that pet, you're going to care for this every day of your life now. And it's going to be gone one day. You're going to have to deal with that loss. If you're lucky, if you're a parent, your kids are going to have to deal with your loss and not the other way around. That's why we have kids. They make us feel immortal, right? Like, your kid is you shooting your load off into the future, guaranteeing that another load will be shot sometime down the way from them. So your load will just keep going into eternity. But pets die, man. And then you get another one. It's a weird system of happiness and grief. But the joke goes on to say that it's because like there are things that you're expected to do for children that you're kind of a lunatic to do for an animal, for your cat or your dog, right? And like if you go into a doctor's office with your kid and the doctor comes out and tells you your kid needs a surgery for $5,000, if you don't pay for that surgery, you're a monster. Like, you're a terrible parent. I don't know if you can be forced to pay for that surgery. I don't know what the legal ramifications are, but I know the moral ramifications on how society will view you from this point forward. If you don't pay for that surgery, you're going to be dropped from the PTA. Well, probably because your kid will be dead and you're not in the school anymore. Well, maybe you got another kid and you're still in it. Either way, you're going to be dropped from the PTA. They're going to write articles about you. You're probably going to be on Fox News. Yup. Greta Van Susteren, is she still on there? Have they gotten so crazy that they can't even have her on anymore? Whatever. Whoever is on Fox News right now is going to like talk to you about your end-of-life decision-making. So you're expected to pay that $5,000 for your kid, and you do it. You don't get any extra credit for it either. You just do it. It's your kid. However, if it's your dog or your cat who needs a surgery for $5,000, and you pay it, you're viewed as kind of crazy, like eccentric. People start wondering how much money you really have. They start thinking you might be rich or have more money than you need. And none of that's true. But in the joke, I make the joke that the doctor comes in, tells you it's like $4,000, and you're just like, ooh, that's a lot of money. He's 12. Maybe I'll dig out the audio and put it on. You can actually, no. You can go to ChristopherSear.com and you can watch my booking video. It's on that. I think. But anyway, the joke's kind of bullshit though, right? Like, because in reality, I pay. Like, I've paid so much money for medical care for dogs and 2 cats. 3 dogs and 2 cats, yeah. I paid so much money for medical care over these. I could have bought another car easily. And I would have paid more money for that cat. I mean, if they had told me, hey, if you pay $5,000, this cat isn't going to be in pain and it'll live another year, I'd have been like, all right, well, do you take checks? Cash App? How do we pay this? But no, it was to the point. Cat was 21 years old, which I am told is very old for a cat. Like, to where the cat is like, hey, man, look, it's cool here in this house. Like, I know I got a bed by the vent, but I'm kind of ready, dude. Like, first of all, you're going to be turning on the air conditioner soon, and I'm not having that. I'm 190 in cat years. I can't do that. So I'm going to check out. I was like, all right, dude, if you gotta. Godspeed, little warrior. Anyway, that depressed me. I didn't want to work on a podcast after that, so I left the audio sitting there. And then there's just been crazy times, right? Like, we're all having crazy times. Like, I can't tell you what I've been busy with for the last 2 weeks, but I can tell you that I have definitely been busy. I could probably find a list. It's probably mostly projects in my basement. I don't know. Obviously, I've been watching the news too much. Stephen King Day happened last week, which the release of the new Stephen King book. It's 4 novellas. I thought I did something really cool. I ordered the hardcover and the Kindle version, and I was going to read the hardcover version, but still have the Kindle version in hand, you know? And then the hardcover version kept getting delayed, so I read most of it on the Kindle. But in what is an exercise of willpower I show in no other area of my life, I held the last story till today when the hardcover arrived. So I'm going to read that tomorrow. But it was hard. It was difficult to not just go ahead and finish that book on the Kindle. So far, so good, though. I hope the last story lives up to it. It will. I don't know. I think that's it. Like, it's just been busy. Like, there's been little things I've put into my calendar. And I've slept. Like, believe it or not, Chris Sear likes to sleep occasionally, and I did. So, here we are. Oh, been watching the news a lot of social media, a lot of all that stuff. All depressing. None of it's fun. Not a bit of it's fun, right? Like, I don't know. Like, even if you're a policy wonk, even if you're a news junkie, this stopped being interesting, like, weeks ago. Now it's just, are we going to open? Aren't we going to open? Are we all going to die? Aren't we all going to die? And no matter which side you support, there's tons of news and idiots with big mouths who tell you that you're right. And not all of it's science-based. Some of it's Republican. That's my bias. You can think the other way. Like, if you're one of the morons who posted the video of those 2 idiot doctors in Bakersfield who have no idea how statistics work, and are just proof that not everybody who practices medicine is particularly smart. Well, that's on you, man. Maybe you found them particularly enlightening instead of just being opportunistic shitheads. But that probably tells you the mood I've been in while I while I watch the news. It's been a day. It's been a week. It's been a month. It's been whatever measure of time you are currently experiencing. I read this book called Descent a long time ago. I don't know if you read it. It's a novel. It's a sci-fi novel about a basically journey to the center of the earth. And I don't want to give too much away, but in it, to do it, this expedition crew changes their sleep schedule to a 36-hour day. And all I can think of lately is this would be the time to try it. Right? Like, if you could change your sleep schedule, just change your entire circadian rhythm to a 36-hour day instead of a 24-hour day, why wouldn't you try it now? Biohacking. That's the way of the future. Let's do it. I'm not going to. I already have a weird sleep. I think my day is 72 hours with a 14-hour sleep required every 72 hours. That seems to be what I'm running on. Anyway, there's this image that I saw on Facebook the other day. A friend and I were having a discussion about survivalists and these protests we're seeing in states that have issued stay-at-home order extensions, and how the people coming out to protest should be the people that are the coolest with these type of stay-at-home things, right? Like survivalists for years have been stockpiling food and basic needs and water, so they should be able to stay in their home for 3 to 6 months after a major attack or something like that. Yet they're being asked to stay home for 2 weeks where they can still have food delivered and watch Hulu, but they have a problem with it. And we couldn't figure out like why. And we had a bunch of different theories that we just battered back and forth. And this image I saw on Facebook summed it up pretty nicely, in that the biggest problem is this isn't the apocalypse these survivalists have been looking for. Right? Like they were looking for an end of the world where bodies would be stacked outside of their doors and they'd be safe inside and emerge as kings and warlords in this new apocalyptic wonderland. And it tracks. Like, that's as good an explanation as I could think of. And I have a life where I used to be intimately associated with some of these people, right? Like, back in the early 2000s up until the mid 2000s, I was in a group that had a lot of preppers in it. And most of these people weren't most of them, a lot of them, hopefully, weren't the crazy types of survivalists you're seeing at these protests. These were people who stockpiled canned goods, dry goods, candles, batteries, things like that. Things they knew they would need in case of an emergency, and they were required to hang out in their house. So they could not be a drain on relief organizations trying to help other people who weren't as fortunate to have these kind of resources. So there was a sense of community responsibility to prepping. If I have food, I don't need to take food that could go to help someone less fortunate than me. Those are preppers. But the survivalist aspect, they were there too. And we knew it. One of the things I liked most about this organization, and in retrospect, it might be also the thing I like least. I don't know. I'm still unpacking a lot of that. But one of the things I liked most was that we banned talk about religion and politics. So the person sitting across from you teaching you how to make an arrowhead or a candle couldn't also start talking about the United Nations stormtroopers hiding in the basements of Walmarts. It wasn't allowed. They would be kicked out. And at the time, I liked it because I didn't want to know how crazy someone was if I didn't have to know. I liked being left in the dark on that. Now I'm kind of like, I kind of wish I knew some of these people were crazy back then, because it would have saved me some trouble in getting to know them. But the survivalist aspect, they're a little more extreme. They're not there for that sense of community. I always view them as the super born-again Christians who get off on knowing some people are going to go to hell and they get to go to heaven, right? Survivalism's the same way. There are people who want to be rewarded for the actions they've done. And they want to be able to say, I told you so, to the people who didn't do those same things. And they're not getting to do that. Right? Like the survivalist now is being told, use your resources and we'll all make it through this. They don't want to all make it through. They want their enemies to die so they can look at their bloodied corpses and say, I told you so. Why didn't you save food? I did. It's not about sharing. It's about displaying. I don't know. There's a whole different mentality to it. When you talk to any of them for a little bit, you know. You could tell which ones are which in the first couple seconds. But there they are in the courthouses and state houses across America, waving guns in the faces of police officers and somehow not getting maced, shot, killed, drugged before the media. If any of these people are shot tomorrow, I guarantee you're not going to see the picture the AP ran of them holding a rifle in a state capitol shown at their funeral. But shit, man, we got to show as much negative imagery of Trayvon Martin as we can still to this day, don't we? I don't know. I didn't mean to get political, but man, it really has. Like, the measurement of time has been emotionally fraught with peril. I don't know. When I was a kid, man, one of my favorite Twilight Zone episodes is written by Richard Matheson, the guy who wrote I Am Legend. He wrote Duel, which is a great movie. Like if you're cooped up, and I don't know if it's on Netflix, it should be. If it's not, man, find it. If you're cooped up and you need a movie to watch and you could deal with it being a little dated, the movie Duel, D-U-E-L, Duel, not duel like D-U-A-L, Duel. But the movie Duel with Richard Dreyfuss in it, man. It's some intense car-on-car action. That's all I'll tell you. It's really good. Anyway, Richard Matheson was a great writer for TV and short stories. But the Twilight Zone episode is called The Shelter, ironically enough. But it's about a guy who buys a bomb shelter. No one else in his neighborhood does. And the bombs go off. And it's about him having to make the hard decision to not let his neighbors in. And you're really in his head, right? Like you are in his head realizing that for him to survive, he has to cut off the other people. He can't invite his whole neighborhood into his bomb shelter because then they'll all die. And there's a lot of guilt he has to work through and things like that. So it's a lot of people's favorite Twilight Zone episode for different reasons, though, because the survivalists you're seeing marching on state capitals, they wouldn't have had that emotional barrel. These guys, they're looking forward to possibly shooting their neighbors to keep them out of the bunker. And one of them's listening right now going, that's not me, that's not true. Maybe it isn't. But odds are it is. I don't know. It gave the rest of the prepping community a bad name. Even though I still say I don't think it's fair to include survivalists as part of that community because survivalists don't give a shit about community. But whatever. And somebody takes your movement and moves it too far to one direction. You either leave the movement or you kill that person. That's probably not right. I don't know. You're probably better at organizational dynamics than I am. One of the things I did last week is I recorded a story for my friend Gwen's show that she's putting up on the internet. A lot of comics. She got to send in videos. I don't know, since stand-up's kind of on hold till we get clubs back up and running, I'm not into doing internet stand-up, so instead I did a bit of storytelling. I recorded it. It's a story I've been trying to get to a final version of so I could submit to some national podcasts. I had to do a 10-minute version for her show, and I submitted that just fine, but it was an edited version from like a 15 to 18 minutes that I recorded. So I thought it'd be fun to just include that audio. It's a little bit different because I'm ripping the audio from the video, so forgive me for that difference, but you guys have dealt with some shitty audio over the last few years, so it's probably not as bad as any of that. Anyway, I made it this far in without giving any kind of introduction, I'm pretty sure. So it's Impolite Company. I'm Chris Sear. And hey, thanks for sticking around. Follow us on social media. Social. Follow Shush on social. I can't talk anymore. Follow us on social media. Impolite STL on Twitter. ImpoliteCompany.com. Impolite STL on Facebook. Peace out. I used to tell this story a lot in bars back in my drinking days. Even before I did stand-up, like I've told this story a lot over the course of the last 20 years or so. It's a story that a friend of mine forces me to tell every single person she's ever introduced me to the very first time she's introduced me to him. And I get it. It's a fun story. So I don't know if it particularly gives you any insight into my psyche, into who I am as a person. Like, I don't think it sums me up in any way. It does explain some things about me to this day that have stuck with me. Probably some things that shaped parts of my personality. Mostly it's funny. She likes it because there's a shocking turn in it. And I won't give it away, but there's a turn. And she digs that. My mom hates that I tell this story, so if you're my mom, you probably don't want to listen. You've probably heard me tell this story before. I like the story, personally. Like, the thing you need to remember about my parents is they were young. I do jokes about how young they were in my stand-up set. Like, my mom was 14 when I was born, 15, like on the cusp. And my dad was like 17. Like, my biological father was 17. My dad, the man who raised me, was 17. Like, none of my parents were adults when they were having children. So in this story, I'm 15, which means my mom is 30. And I'm going to tell you, like, she must have done a fine job because she had a 15-year-old when she was 30. If I was 30 and I'd had a child in my teens, I wouldn't have had a 15-year-old at 30 because that child would have died at like 10 of some negligent thing I did. So kudos to her. But I wouldn't change it. Like, all these little stories, they're what make you who you are as an adult. And I'm kind of okay with that. It took me 40 years to get okay with who I am as an adult. So she doesn't get to change history. She just gets to accept my thanks for not killing me. Which is pretty much all any child should be able to tell a parent. Well, which is all any parent should want from a child, is for them to acknowledge, hey, you didn't kill me. That's pretty great. I don't know. I know people with way more normal, quote unquote, childhoods than I had who came out way more fucked up. So anyway, so like I said, it was when I was 15 and I worked at McDonald's when I was 15 for the summer, and I kept the job. I worked constantly, saved up money. Like, my parents, like, as a reward for how well I had done, they gave me my own phone line. And that was a big deal because this was the 90s, man. There weren't cell phones yet. We were still, 8 or 9 years away from them being a regular thing. Maybe 3 years away from people at Radio Shack getting bilked into, like, huge contracts they couldn't afford. Anyway, my parents gave me this phone, and they said, my mom made a point the day she gave it to me to say, Chris, we just want to let you know, we've set it up to where this phone cannot dial 1-900 numbers. Now, if you're too young to remember, these were the phone sex lines, right? Like, before there was internet porn, you could call a number and they would charge you like $10 a minute for someone to hold an electric screwdriver or an electric toothbrush up to the phone, tell you it's a vibrator, and then they would moan your name a few times. And that's how you got off. It was an imperfect system. You had to have a touch-tone phone. I don't think you could do it if you had a rotary phone. We didn't. Luckily, we weren't that ancient. But my mom made a point of telling me this, and I didn't care. Like, I was too happy to have my own phone, because it was a big deal to have your own phone line back then. Because you shared your phone line with your entire family if you didn't have your own line, which meant they would pick up in the middle of your calls. Sometimes they would pick up and listen on purpose. Sometimes you had to get off the phone so they could make calls. It was just not cool. And even then, they could just sit in the other room and hear everything you wanted to say to, like, your boyfriend or your girlfriend or whoever you were into banging. So to have your own phone was so cool. I really blanked out on my mom telling me that I couldn't dial a phone sex line from this. But anyway, went along with my life, went to work, came home, went to work, came home. School started. I was in this college prep program that happened every Saturday. I went, I studied. You did math and science and English to get ready for standardized tests. And then you went home. It was like 8 hours on a Saturday, every Saturday. It really fucks up your weekend. The only exclusions you got were to play sports. So when I had a football game, I didn't have to do math. That was fun. But one day I got done with this program. I'm waiting for my mom to pick me up. It's in St. Louis City proper on a Saturday. The weather's good. I'm waiting outside. Streets are dead because it's St. Louis City proper in the 90s, and nothing happened on the weekends in the city. And I'm waiting for my mom to pick me up. She picks me up in our 1979 Ford LTD, because that was the car we drove in the 90s still. That was a boat, man. It was four-door. I learned to drive in that car, and I took out so many street signs when I was learning to drive, because that car was like all metal. Like, it would take out anything it hit. It was beautiful. Went very fast too. Anyway, she picks me up, drives a couple blocks away. She's very quiet for the 2 blocks she drives. She pulls over to the side of the road. I'm like, well, this is weird. I don't understand why we're pulled over. And then she lit a cigarette. And that was an indicator something was really wrong. Because when I started high school, my parents found religion. And it was the kind of religion where you stopped drinking, stopped smoking, and ended all your friendships with people because they got tired of hearing you tell them about Jesus, right? So I knew something was up. Like, if your mom picks you up, pulls over, is stone quiet, starts smoking a cigarette, you know some bad news is coming. And I like, did grandma die? Are mom and dad getting a divorce? Like, what's going on here? And I'm sitting there quietly, and my mom turns to me and she goes, Chris, do you love Jesus? Now, if I didn't know I was in trouble before, I knew I was in trouble then, because that's never a good question. Like, there's no time outside of, like, in church where someone asks you with a very cheerful voice, like, do you love Jesus? Then honk your car, or whatever. I don't know. But if it's your parent smoking her first cigarette in 2 years after she picks you up from school on a Saturday asking you if you love Jesus, you know you're in trouble for something. And I didn't know what it was, and I'm not going to volunteer anything. So I was just like, yeah, Mom, I love Jesus. He's a good dude. Like, I got no problems with JC, man. Me and him, we're boys. And my mom goes, Chris, if you love Jesus, then why do you do the things you do? And by this time, I'd had some poli-sci classes, right? I had studied the commies. I knew how they did things. They dragged you into a room. They said, what are you guilty of? Because they knew one thing. But then you'd admit to 10 other things. So now they had like a whole dossier on you. And then the KGB would disappear you away. And I wasn't going to fall for what the commies did because I was a good American boy. I read way too many spy novels as a teenager. I was like, I don't know what you mean, Mom. Like, I don't know what I did. What's wrong? And my mom looks at me and she goes, Chris, if you love Jesus, then why do you do the things like this? And she takes this piece of paper out of her purse. She unfolds it and she sets it on the dashboard. And keep in mind, like I said, this is a 1979 Ford LTD, which means the dashboard's as big as a kitchen table with a piece of glass in front of it, right? So she flattens this piece of paper out, and I lean up and I look at it, and it's a phone bill, and it's for $400. And I can't figure out what happened. And it was all because one night I got off work, and I got home, and it was probably about 1 a.m, because back then, when I worked at McDonald's, I worked too many hours for a teenager. In fact, I got my McDonald's manager in trouble because at school one day in like September, October, I was sleeping in class and the teacher asked me why I was so tired. And I said, because I had to sleep. I had to work until like 1 or 2 in the morning the night before. And he asked, well, how many hours are you working at that McDonald's? I was like, I don't know. I usually get overtime, which is pretty good because I like having the money. And I did not know that teacher was on like the board of the council of teachers that worked with McDonald's corporate office to make sure students weren't being like taken advantage of and having their studies getting interrupted by working at a fast food place. So he immediately went and reported to my manager for giving me too many hours and ruined a lot of overtime for me. So whatever. That sucked. Anyway, I got home one night. It's like 1 a.m. There's nothing on television because cable. There's no Netflix, no Hulu, none of that. And so I went to my room and I'm just sitting there. And it's like you get off work, you can't just go to bed because then you feel like you don't have a life. So I didn't know what to do. And I'm reading the newspaper. And we have a newspaper here in St. Louis called the Riverfront Times. It's our alternative weekly, right? Right now it's owned by Village Voice, but back then it was truly independent. And it used to actually have articles in it, so you could read it. It wasn't just a bunch of ads. And I'd read through it, and I got to the back page, and the back page is nothing but 3 columns of 900 numbers. Nothing but sex lines. I don't know why. It was just out there. But it's 3 columns of it, and I remembered my mom told me I could not dial these. And something clicked in my head. You can't just tell me I can't do something and I'm going to accept that it's not possible. You can't put a fence in front of me and say, don't touch that fence. It's got 10,000 volts in it. I need to touch that fence and make sure it's not only 9,999 volts. So I was curious if they actually were blocked. So I picked the first number on that list and I dialed it. And lo and behold, it rang. And I was surprised. I was like, oh man, I don't know if mom lied or she was wrong, but let's see what's this like. And someone answered, and they explained how it works to me. And all these lines work the same way. First minute is free. No charge at all for a sex line for the first minute. And every minute after that was $5.99. But the first minute was free. And I don't think I needed much more than a minute. I was just curious, right? But that whole first minute was just her going, yeah, baby. In like 45 seconds, we're going to tell you some great stuff. In 30 seconds, we're going to talk about some amazing things. In 20 seconds, oh, it's going to be so hot. In 15 seconds, it's going to be amazing. In 5 seconds, we're going to have so much fun. And it's going to cost you $7 a minute. And I would hang up. Hung up. I was like, all right, well, that was weird. It was wasted minute. But it was funny that it rang. I wonder if it was just a fluke. Like maybe I dialed the phone and lightning struck a telephone pole somewhere. That crossed the circuit and I got through and I couldn't do it again. So I went to the second number on that page and I dialed it and it rang. And it was the same type of deal. It was the first minute was free, but it was just somebody basically doing a countdown to that second minute where they were now going to charge you like $6 or $7 a minute. And I was like, hung up. And I was like, well, it worked the first 2 times. I wonder what the third one would be like. And I dialed it. And the same thing happened. And if you think that was the last one I dialed, you're wrong. I dialed every number on that page because once I do one thing, I got to keep doing it until I can't do it anymore. I'm the god of excess here, man. I always have been. So I dialed every number on that back page, and it was every single one of them. Like, none of them were interesting. Each one, the entire first minute, was just some kind of recording promising me how much fun I was going to have in the second minute, and me hanging up before I would get charged. Which is what I thought, until my mom laid out that phone bill for $400. And I learned there were a lot of things I did quickly as a 15-year-old boy. Hanging up the phone was not one of them. Because, yeah, all those calls were on there. And my mom was like, Chris, is this what you want from women? And I was busted. I knew it was. So I was like, Mom, I was just curious. That's all. I was curious. I didn't even mention the fact, like, I thought I was being really kind of a mensch, kind of a good guy for not mentioning the fact that she had lied to me about my ability to even call these numbers. But she was just like, well, Chris, why are you curious like that? Like, if that's what you want from women, like, I'm a woman. I could talk to you that way if that's what you're looking for. And I was like, no, that's not what I want. It's not what I want at all. My mom, though, was getting angrier and angrier. She's like, Chris, if that's what you think of women and that's what you want from women, I can talk to you like that. It won't cost me $400. I was like, Mom, look, I won't do it again. I was just curious. Chris, I could talk to you like that right now for free. And I was like, Mom, I get where you're going. I don't need, oh, baby, Chris, do you want me now? And like everything stopped except her because she kept going. And I was like, no. And like she just laid on like the next 10 minutes of a conversation that was just the dirtiest things that to this day I can't even repeat. It was just a lot of profanity mixed in with bedroom talk. And like, it's a surprise to me my parents aren't still married. It was that level of obscenity. And like sailors would have left port ready to die on their swords after hearing all this. And she just did it for 10 minutes. And I just sat there just stunned, shocked, appalled, like not knowing what was going on. And she got to the end and she was just quiet. And I'd like to tell you I had some good like comeback. Like I was able to just dive in and just zing her, like just bring it all back to where I was the hero of the story. But I couldn't, man. I cried. I'm not gonna lie. I cried hard. Like I cried like somebody was putting bamboo splints underneath my fingernails, that kind of crying. Which is what you do if you're a 15-year-old boy and your mom starts screaming obscenities. Like, I know there's a part of it that is probably like when you catch your kid smoking a pack of cigarettes, you're like, well, now you're smoking the whole pack and you do it till they throw up. This was like that, but way more traumatic. And like, I'm sitting there crying and my mom's quiet. She puts the cigarette out, throws it out the window, which is littering. I want to tell you, littering way hard. And, she just goes, I just raised you better than that. And I thought you were better. And she drives off. And that hurt worse than the dirty talk. Like, that was brutal. So we get home. And when we get home, like, this part of the story always makes me realize why the burden was placed on my mom to teach me this lesson. Because I did carry this lesson forward. But when I got home, my mom walks into the house. I don't see her again. I walk in. My dad's there. And my dad's like, did your mom talk to you about the phone bill? And I said, yes, she did. And my dad was like, well, let's not do that again. And I said, okay. And I know that if my dad had picked me up from school, that would have been the extent of the conversation. And it probably would have been just as effective. But I would not remember it as much as I do now. So my mom really drove a point home better. That's the story. She hates it. She wishes I would stop telling it, but it's such a funny story. I told it at my first open mic as my joke, and it was like 6.5 minutes long when I was only supposed to do 4. It has that one turn that's funny. Like, it's a terrible joke. It's a great story. But there it is. Anyway, that's it. I'm Chris Sear. I host Impolite Company, a podcast you can get on anchor.fm. You can follow it on social media at ImpoliteSTL on Facebook or impolitecompany.com on the web. Thanks for having me. Peace out. No gods, no masters.